How the failure of Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within changed the course of JRPGs forever. In 2001, the highly anticipated Final Fantasy film was released. It brought a lot of excitement to gamers and Final Fantasy fans in particular. It could best be described as underwhelming. This box office flop would go on to change the course of JRPGs forever. Hironobu Sakaguchi is probably best known as the creator of Final Fantasy. He started working at Square in the mid-1980s, before it was its own independent company. He was there from the early days of what is now one of the most successful video game companies around. Currently worth over €2 billion. This is heavily down to the success of the Final Fantasy series, which is supposedly called Final Fantasy because Sakaguchi was going to leave the games industry if it failed. He has always been strongly linked with the JRPG genre. After the original Final Fantasy, the JRPG franchise was changed forever and Square was hugely successful in Japan. After the release of the iconic Final Fantasy VII, Square managed to break the international market as well. Final Fantasy and Square were now global, and a large part of that success was down to Sakaguchi. The Final Fantasy series grossed more than €9 billion over the course of its franchise lifetime. Sakaguchi did, however, make a huge mistake. In 2001, he tried his hand at filmmaking. Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within made an estimated $90 million loss. Sakaguchi as director believed he had to step down and take responsibility, leaving a void Square would struggle to fill. When asked about Sakaguchi leaving, Kazuyuki Hashimoto of Square says, especially during the Final Fantasy VII period, Sakaguchi-san made every big decision. That was why everybody moved quickly. It was so exciting. And after Sakaguchi-san left, no one wanted to take responsibility. So all the decision making needed lots of approvals, which took a long time. The company didn't move very quickly. It suffered from big company disease. With the new setup, Square merged with Enix and became a lot more cautious. They used the success of already developed titles to bring in more revenue, a step Square say was necessary after the loss caused by Spirits Within. The games like Dirge of Cerberus, Final Fantasy X-2, Before Crisis and 13-2 came about from this, as well as some others. Jun Iwasaki, the Vice President of Marketing for Square US says, "I was disappointed because they wore out Final Fantasy. I heard after I left the company that Final Fantasy's loyalty decreased with US customers." Frank Home, associate producer of Eidos, which is now owned by Square Enix, says, "I believe if those games were uniform in quality, some of them were fantastic and some of them were just mediocre. But I think if they were uniform in quality, people wouldn't be able to get enough." As for Sakaguchi, he was quickly snatched up by Microsoft. Failure of The Spirits Within or not, he still played a part in the success of PlayStation and Sony. However, there were some difficulties with Microsoft too. Difficult working conditions and hierarchy meant Sakaguchi was limited here. Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey didn't have the impact of games Sakaguchi had made before. Tatsuya Yoshinari, a programmer at Square who worked with Sakaguchi, says, "Lost Odyssey was a really difficult project. At the time we were working on the Unreal Engine, but it was still kind of in development itself. The game and the engine were being developed simultaneously, and they both had bugs that needed to be worked out. So what would happen was, we would update the engine and then the game would no longer function, and we'd have to go and work that out and figure out how to match it up with the newest version." Hiroshi Kawai, character programmer from Square, says, "Their devs were very clear from the get-go, saying, this is what Unreal's made for, and if it fits your needs, great. If it doesn't, you're on your own. If you need documentation, read the source code. If you need help, write us in English." Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey were by no means failures, but they weren't seen in the same light as Sakaguchi's earlier work. For Microsoft, it didn't open up Xbox gamers to the world of JRPGs in the same way the Final Fantasy franchise had. After Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey, Sakaguchi went to work on the last story for Nintendo, taking on the role of director for the first time since Final Fantasy V. Although it was well received critically, it didn't manage to have the cultural impact of any of Sakaguchi's Square titles, failing to crack the top 60 best-selling games on the Wii. It didn't help it was released a year before Nintendo moved on to the next gen. As for the Final Fantasy franchise, it seems to have suffered without Sakaguchi. Final Fantasy 6, 7, 8 and 10 games all developed with Sakaguchi making a lot of the big calls. They all outsold Final Fantasy 11, 12, 13, 13-2 and 14. That is before they closed the servers and relaunched Final Fantasy 14. Keep in mind how different the market was for these earlier games. The best-selling PlayStation game was Gran Turismo, selling 10.8 million copies. The best-selling PlayStation 4 game is GTA 5, selling around 20 million. In fact, you'd have to go to number 9 on the best-selling list to get 10.8 million on the PS4. Sakaguchi's career went from success to success before the spirits within forced him to step down. The setup at the time at Microsoft had technical and structural restrictions which held Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon back. After taking the reins on the last story, it looked like Sakaguchi may have struck gold, but the success of his earlier years didn't return. Hironobu Sakaguchi is still making games today, but on a different scale, and for a different market. It's been 10 years since he developed a game for a console, and 20 since his ill-fated foray into Hollywood. Personally, I'd love to see Sakaguchi developing games without barriers again, as he is responsible for introducing me to the best of what games can be.